Fashion has revolved around our culture throughout the century, from the origins of couture to the changes that have taken place as the century ended, from the time when fashion was defined by French designers to the point where consumers set rules and designers must follow them. Through all aspects, such as designers, image making, financing, fashion is a multi-billion-dollar business that's expanded in our lives and economy. Fashion is ephemeral and elusive, a target that keeps moving. Fashion has changed so much since the 1900s. Back then, women would wear more conservative clothing. Then fashion started to change, and more of the body started to show. Today, the new styles expose a lot of the body and are tighter and smaller. So how has women's fashion really changed over the centuries? During the 1900s to the 1920s, fashion was known as the haute couture era. Because in Paris, designers would set the fashion and people who would wear it were the upper class women. Long curls were worn and bobbed hair was the style. Models were sent by designers to horse races to show off their latest designs. Horse racers was a debut for new fashion. The style in this era had emphasized the shape of women's bodies. The skirts that were worn were long, full, and had a train, similar to wedding dresses. When this era was coming to an end, skirts were getting shorter and were beginning to show ankles. At this time, most women couldn't afford to buy clothing, so they relied on home sewing. Fashion was becoming slimmer and narrower. The hourglass figure was coming to the style, and it emphasized flat busts and slim hips. The modern era consisted from the 1920s to the 1940s. During this decade, women were wearing more comfortable clothing. Some fashion was conservative, but after 1925, short skirts, low waistlines, and flappers were a major development of this decade. Flappers were women with sexual norms and who wore short outfits. Cotton had made clothing stylish, but the primary fabric, which most designers used, was silk. Dresses were made to fit close to emphasize youthful looks. During the 1930s, the Great Depression started. The conservative fashion started again. For example, skirts were being made longer again. Fashion was being based on the mood and economy since the World War II. Since there were limited materials, fashion was emphasized by shorter skirts and blocky jackets. Nylon stockings were rare and women had to sustain with ankle socks and bare legs. During the end of the war, there was a fair amount of clothes available, so women did whatever they could to dress feminine. In the late 1940s, designers were making clothes with rounded shoulders, full skirts, and narrow waists. At this time, women were demanding the new look. 1950s was all about the sloppy bobby socks, sneakers, and poodle skirts. Girls would wear skirts and match it with their sweaters, and if their hair tied up in a ponytail and had ballet slippers. Many actresses set the fashion trend, such as Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield. During the 1960s, young people were creating their own trend and rebelling against traditional clothing. This time was known as the pop or not era. Fashion designers and manufacturers were working together to keep up with the trends from the youth because it became a popular creation for fashion. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, a variety of clothing came into style, such as bell-bottom pants, short miniskirts, and hot pants and blue jeans. During the 1970s, it was impossible to tell what was in style and what was not. The clothing choices were becoming very contrasting. So basically, it was like anything goes. In the 1970s, it was the hippie style, where pants hugged your waist above your hips. Tie-dye shirts were very popular, and jeans were cut up as well. During the 1980s, fashion had an increase on popularity because of designer style. Wealthy people from across the country would go to New York and go to Paris for fashion shows to buy clothing directly from designers. Other producers were imitating expensive styles for the general public. Women were buying expensive business suits and dresses for the day and fancy evening gowns for the night. Since many people were not wealthy, some fashion designers like Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren produced clothing that would appeal to the lower class people. By the 1990s, women were refusing to buy upper class styles and starting to choose more comfortable and casual clothing. Rock and roll became popular and inspired the flannel shirts and ripped jeans look. Hip hop was also popular and that inspired the baggy jeans look. Designers are still designing expensive clothing for women, but nowadays we have all and every style. For instance, we have casual, comfortable, fancy, simple, and extravagant. And some clothing have reasonable prices. Designers have been creating clothing that are more colorful, feminine, and accessible. Many celebrities have begun making their own line of clothing, and young people think name brands are significant. Tighter fitting clothes became popular, and long hair became a trend for men and women. Music has definitely been an influence on popular fashion today.